Hi there, and welcome to the Daily Gardener, and thank you for listening. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling. It's November 1st. Today we celebrate the botanist who is considered the father of taxonomy and the young landscape architect who learned by taking weekly walking tours of gardens. We learn about the botanist who saved Kew and the most famous garden designer you've never heard of. We listen to a little garden folklore for November and an amusing poem about daylight savings. We grow that garden library with today's book, which features The Gardens of Russell Page, and you can get it on Amazon right now for under $4, which is highway robbery or landscape robbery in this case. I'll talk about digging up those dahlias and then share the super cute story about a young botanist and the housekeeper who was sure he was up to no good. But first, let's catch up on a few recent events. It's the start of National Fig Week, which runs through the 7th of November. All of the figs that are growing in the United States are growing in the Central Valley of California, where 28 million pounds of figs are harvested every year. It was Captain Bligh who was honored as the planter of the very first fig in Tasmania back in 1792. The Greek word for fig is sicko. That's why one species of the fig tree is called the sycamore. And figs are the sweetest of all fruits. They're made up of 55% sugar. And today, Fine Gardening shared a great post called Treasures in the November Garden, and it featured posts from a gardener named Carla Zambelli Mudry. Carla shared beautiful images from her November garden, where she commented that the fall witch hazel had started blooming, and her Sochi tea plant is still producing lovely white flowers. The post features pictures of her witch hazel in bloom. Gardeners have soft spots for the delicate yellow spidery flowers of the witch hazel. The common witch hazel virginiana can grow in zones 3 to 8. This post was part of Fine Gardening's garden photo of the day. If you'd like to share your garden with Fine Gardening, you can send them 5 to 10 images of your garden to GPOD, which is short for Garden Picture of the Day, at finegardening.com. So GPOD at finegardening.com, along with a few comments about the plants in the photos. And you can share anything, your successes and failures, funny stories, or favorite plants. Finally, my good friend Kathy Jentz over at the Washington Gardener magazine shared 10 things to do with a pumpkin after Halloween. Her list is so great, I wanted to share it with you here. Compost it, puree it and cook it, turn it into a bird feeder, turn it into a planter, use it as a serving bowl for soup. Pickle the peel, apply a face mask, make doggy treats, wash and roast the seeds, and save a few seeds to grow another pumpkin next year. Now, if you'd like to check out these curated articles for yourself, you're in luck, because I share all of it with the listener community in the free Facebook group, the Daily Gardener Community. So there's no need to take notes or track down links. Just head on over to Facebook the next time you're there. Just look for the Daily Gardener Community and request to join. Here's today's brevities. Today is the anniversary of the death of Carl Linnaeus, who died on this day in 1783. 30 years earlier, on May 1st, 1753, the publication of his masterpiece, Species Plantarum, changed plant taxonomy forever. It gave Linnaeus the moniker Father of Taxonomy. His naming system is called binomial nomenclature. And it was Linnaeus himself who said, God created, Linnaeus ordered. One side note worth mentioning is how Linnaeus's collection ended up leaving Sweden and finding a home in London. When Linnaeus died in 1778, his belongings were sold. Joseph Banks, the president of the Linnean Society, acted quickly, buying everything of horticultural value on behalf of the society. When the King of Sweden realized Linnaeus's legacy was no longer in Sweden, he sent a fast Navy ship in pursuit. But it was too late. Banks's precious cargo made it back to London first, and so Linnaeus's collection is in London at the Linnaeus Society's Burlington House. And it was Joseph Banks who secured the legacy of Linnaeus. Banks spread Linnaeus's ideas across the globe, which was easier for him to accomplish since he was based in London, which had become the hub for the science of botany. And today is the birthday of Charles Eliot, who was born on this day in 1859. Eliot was the son of a prominent Boston family. In 1869, the year his mom died, his father, Charles William Eliot, became the president of Harvard University. In 1882, Charles went to Harvard to study botany. A year later, he began apprenticing with the landscape firm of Frederick Law Olmsted. As a young landscape architect, Eliot enjoyed visiting different natural areas, and he conducted regular walking tours around Boston. In his diary for 1878, Eliot did something kind of neat. He made a list. It's basically what we call a listicle nowadays, and he titled it A Partial List of Saturday Walks Before 1878. Isn't that fabulous? As a young architect, Eliot spent 13 months touring England and Europe between 1885 and 1886. The trip was actually Olmsted's idea, and it no doubt added to Eliot's appreciation of various landscape concepts. During the trip, Eliot kept a journal where he wrote down his thoughts and made sketches of the places he was visiting. Eliot's benchmark was always Boston, and throughout his memoirs, he was continually comparing new landscapes to the beauty of his native landscape in New England. Eliot's story ended too soon. He died at 37 from spinal meningitis. Since Eliot had been working on plans for the Arnold Arboretum, he'd gotten to know Charles Sprague Sargent. So it was Sargent who wrote a tribute to Eliot and featured it in his weekly journal called Garden and Forest. Eliot's death had a significant impact on his dad. At times, the two had struggled to connect. Charles didn't like it when his dad got remarried, and their personalities were very different. Charles could be a little melancholy. When Charles died, his dad, Charles Sr., began to call through all of his work, and he was shocked to discover all that his son had accomplished. In April 1897, Charles Sr. confided to a friend, "I am examining his letters and papers, and I'm filled with wonder at what he accomplished in the 10 years of professional life. I should have died without ever having appreciated his influence. His death has shown it to me." Despite his heavy workload as the president of Harvard, Charles Sr. immediately set about compiling all of his son's work and used it to write a book called Charles Eliot, Landscape Architect. The book came out in 1902, and today it's considered a classic work in the field of landscape architecture. And today is the anniversary of the death of the botanist John Lindley, who died on this day in 1865. Lindley was a British gardener, a botanist, and an orchidologist. He served as secretary to the Royal Horticultural Society for 43 years. And this is why the Lindley Library at the RHS is named in honor of John Lindley. Lindley's dad owned a nursery and an orchard, and Lindley grew up helping with the family business. In 1815, he went to London. He became friends with William Jackson Hooker, who in turn introduced Lindley to Sir Joseph Banks, who hired him to work in his herbarium. When Banks died, the fate of the Royal Botanic Gardens was put in jeopardy. Banks's death corresponded with the death of King George III, who was the patron of the garden. These deaths created an opening for the British government to question whether the garden should remain open. To explore their options, the government asked Lindley, as well as Joseph Paxton and John Wilson, to put together a recommendation. Ultimately, Lindley felt the institution should be the People's Garden and the headquarters for botany in England. The government rejected the proposal and decided to close the garden. But on February 11th, 1840, Lindley ingeniously demanded that the issue be put before the Parliament. His advocacy brought the matter to the public's attention, and the garden-loving British public was not about to lose the Royal Botanic. And so Lindley saved Kew Gardens, and William Hooker was chosen as the new director. Lindley shortened the genus Orchidaceae to orchid, which is much more friendly to pronounce. And when he died, Lindley's massive personal orchid collection was moved to a new home at Kew. As for Lindley, there are over 200 plant species named for him. There's Lindleyi, Lindleyana, Lindleyanum, Lindlea, and Lindleioides, to name a few. And here's a little remembered factoid about Lindley. He was blind in one eye. And today is the birthday of the British gardener, garden designer, and landscape architect Russell Page, who was born on this day in 1906. His full name was Montague Russell Page. Page is known for his book called The Education of a Gardener. The book is a classic in garden literature. In it, Page shares his vast knowledge of plants and trees and design. The book ends with a description of his dream garden. In the book, there are many wonderful quotes by Page. Page wrote, "I know nothing whatever of many aspects of gardening, and very little of a great many more. But I never saw a garden from which I did not learn something, and seldom met a gardener who did not, in some way or another, help me." First published in 1962, Page's book shares his charming anecdotes and timeless garden advice. He wrote, "I like gardens with good bones and an affirmed underlying structure. I like well-made and well-marked paths, well-built walls, well-defined changes in level. I like pools and canals, paved sitting places, and a good garden in which to picnic or take a nap." And he also said, "If you wish to make anything grow, you must understand it, and understand it in a very real sense. Green fingers are a fact, and a mystery only to the unpracticed. But green fingers are the extensions of a verdant heart. Oh, love that. Page is considered the first modern garden designer. Like Pete Oudolph, Page used flowers to create living, natural paintings. And although he designed gardens for the Duke of Windsor and Oscar de la Renta, it was Russell Page who said, "I am the most famous garden designer you've never heard of." Page designed the gardens at the Frick Collection in New York City in 1977. In 2014, when the Frick was making plans to expand, they initially considered demolishing the Page Garden. After a year of facing public backlash in support of the garden, which was something that the museum never anticipated, in May of 2015, the Frick decided to keep the garden. During the year of debating the fate of the garden, the Frick indicated that they believed the garden was never meant to be a permanent part of the museum. But all that changed when Charles Birnbaum, the founder of the Cultural Landscape Foundation, decided to do his homework. Birnbaum discovered an old Frick press release from 1977 where they proudly introduced the Page landscape as a permanent garden. Birnbaum shared his discovery on the Huffington Post, and thanks to him, the 3,700 square foot Page Garden lives on for all of us to enjoy. In unearthed words, here's an English folklore rhyme about November that was first printed in 1876. If there's ice in November that will bear a duck, there'll be nothing after but sludge and muck. And finally, here's a great poem from Phyllis McGinley called Daylight Savings Time. In spring, when maple buds are red, we turn the clock an hour ahead, which means each April that arrives, we lose an hour out of our lives. Who cares when autumn birds in flocks fly southward? Back we turn the clocks, and so regain a lovely thing, that missing hour we lost in spring. It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, The Gardens of Russell Page, by Gabrielle Zulin and Marina Shins. Zulin and Shins researched and photographed all of Page's best work, both early and late, and some now no longer existent. They share some of his private files and unpublished writing and help us get to know Page and his work more keenly. The book shares over 250 photographs that capture the exceptional beauty of Page's creations in England, America, and throughout continental Europe. This book came out in 2008. You can get used copies using the Amazon link in today's show notes for under $4. Another great steal. Here's today's garden chore. If you've had your first frost, and a lot of the country has, that's the signal to gardeners to go dig up their dahlia and canna tubers and get them stored for next spring. Once they're out of the ground, I brush mine off, removing any extra soil, and then I put them in a basket or container with lots of perlite to keep them cool and dry. And then I put them on a dark shelf in the basement storage room, where they hang out until spring. The perlite keeps the tubers dry and allows them to breathe. Finally, here's something sweet to revive the little botanic spark in your heart. When I was researching John Lindley, I stumbled on an adorable story about him. Lindley arrived in England when he was a teenager. Naturally, he needed a place to stay, so Hooker graciously took him in and gave him a room at his home called Halesworth. The story goes that over the course of a few weeks, the Halesworth housekeeper had observed that Lindley's bed was always neat as a pin. It was clear he never slept in it. The housekeeper immediately began to wonder what Lindley was doing and where he was sleeping. She began to worry that he might not be the kind of person that they wanted living at Halesworth. When her worry got the best of her, she brought the matter to Hooker's attention. Anxiety is contagious, and the housekeeper's concern made Hooker worry. So he confronted Lindley and asked him to account for his unused bed. Lindley calmly explained that he was hoping to go to Sumatra to collect plants. In anticipation of the physical difficulties of the plant exploration, Lindley had been spending every night sleeping on the boards of the hardwood floor in his room. Well, Lindley got to keep living at Halesworth. He wrote his first book there called Observations on the Structure of Fruits, but he never made it to Sumatra. Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener, and remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day. The Daily Gardener is produced weekdays in lovely Maple Grove, Minnesota. You can find complete show notes over at thedailygardener.org, and be sure to share the show with your garden friends. You can find The Daily Gardener on all your favorite social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Pinterest, and of course, Facebook. While you're over at Facebook, don't forget to join the Daily Gardener community. Just search for these 3 words, Daily Gardener Community. The group will pop right up, and then request to join. Finally, I want to thank my team at Podfly Productions, where my fabulous editor is Eric Begay. Have a great day in the garden, and we'll see you tomorrow.